Okay, in this lecture, we're going to be talking about the causes of World War I. So this directly follows our last unit, which was American imperialism. And when we talk about the causes of World War I, we're going to be talking a lot about Europe to start with. Even though this is American history, it's important to understand what happened in Europe prior to the Americans joining World War I. The Americans won't join World War I until quite a bit has happened uh, in the way of like fighting. So they don't join for a couple years after World War I starts. So again, it's kind of important to understand what led to the outbreak in fighting and how World War I started. So World War I is also referred to as the Great War. It was not called World War I until we had a Second World War called World War II. And so initially it was called the Great War. This lasted from July 1914 to November 1918, so about 4 years. And it's the first man made catastrophe of the 20th century. And over 17 million people are killed during the Great War, and it was the deadliest war of its time. However, during World War II, that number will be surpassed. One of the things that marked the Great War that made it different from any war before was the trenches. You can see here, trenches are long dugout tunnels, and people would dig these trenches to avoid the firing from above. And so these dugout trenches kind of marked World War I. It made the war last a really long time. So there is not a single event that led to World War I. The causes are quite complicated and they kind of tie in with one another. Um, what really caused the Great War was a chain of events plus a history of the involved countries, and that leads to the outbreak of the fighting. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this lecture. There are two sides in World War I. You had the Central Powers and you had the Allied powers. There were also neutral countries, but them being neutral, that means they weren't involved in the fighting. The neutral countries would be in this map, the countries that are in yellow. So you can remember the causes of World War I by using the acronym MAIN. There are 4 main causes of World War I, and each of those letters stands for one of the causes. So your causes are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. So let's talk about militarism. Militarism is when many countries were strengthening their military forces. The idea of militarism means a buildup of the armed forces. So this can involve the Navy, it can involve the Army. So an example might be countries expanding their navies and building more warships, or countries that are recruiting more soldiers to fight in their army. So a couple examples of this that were happening around this time period: France and Germany had doubled their armies between 1870 and 1914. Great Britain and Germany had the world's largest and most powerful navies, and they competed for dominance of the sea. Okay, so they were trying to control different territories in different bodies of water. And industrialization allowed these countries to manufacture more powerful weapons. It allowed them to mass produce ships because they had access to steel. You can see how big these warships are that they are building around this time. This is the first time that modern weaponry is used in a war, things such as tanks and machine guns. And again, that was because of industrialization, the mass production of goods. And the military is also going to be given a high priority in the economy, which means there's going to be a lot of money spent on the military in these various countries. So that is militarism. Moving on to alliances. Alliances are a mutual defense agreement that means if one country is attacked, the other allied countries would have to help. So it was important for these countries in Europe to form alliances, or sometimes I think of these as partnerships with other countries, because it helped those countries protect one another. Alliances are still in place today. For example, the United States has had a strong alliance with Great Britain for quite a number of years. So this is an example of the alliance systems that were set prior to World War I. So if you see, you have in red, we have the alliance known as the Triple Alliance, and that is Italy right here, Austria-Hungary right here, and Germany right here. So you can see that this is kind of a strategic alliance because all of these countries border one another. So it was in their best interest to form alliances with one another because they protect each other. Austria-Hungary and Germany occupied the innermost part of Europe. So this right here that I'm highlighting, this is like all of Europe, a part of Europe, and the innermost part of Europe was all in an alliance with each other. So they were able to protect each other. Now, to counter that alliance, another alliance is formed, and that's called the Triple Entente. Okay, the Triple Entente included Great Britain right here, it included Russia right here, and it included France. Now, you can see that this is also strategic. Since the Triple Alliance controlled the middle part of Europe, Triple Entente was controlling the exterior of Europe. So this was a way for these countries to check each other, to make sure that these countries here in the center weren't going to grow too powerful. Another alliance that's not on here was a separate alliance between Russia and Serbia. Serbia is this green country right here. And Serbia really wanted an alliance with Russia because they felt threatened right here by Austria-Hungary. Okay, they felt threatened. And so if you had this huge country over here that was going to be in a partnership with them, that was going to be to their benefit. So again, these alliances are set up to protect these countries from one country attacking another. But really what it leads to is all of these countries getting pulled into a conflict that really didn't have anything to do with them. England gets pulled into a conflict that they have nothing to do with because of something else that happens that we'll talk about in a minute. Our third cause, or the I, is imperialism. Imperialism, again, is when one strong country seeks to dominate a weaker country. So the definition here is when a country increases its power and wealth by acquiring new lands under its control, or we can call those new territories. So what was happening here is different countries across Europe are looking to carve out different parts of the world so that they can have control. So you can see here, you have two countries that are kind of fighting over the carving up of Europe. It kind of looks like a turkey. It's a political cartoon that just shows these two powers carving out the world. So countries like France and Great Britain had already established or began to establish worldwide empires, taking colonies all over the world. And then other countries, Germany and Russia, for example, wanted a piece in that. They were kind of jealous that Great Britain and France had created these worldwide empires. So these countries like Great Britain and France, they also became really rich because when they colonized a certain area, they were able to gain wealth from exploiting the natural resources. And a lot of times they would enslave the people that already lived in those territories and force them into labor. And so this kind of like outright subjugation of these people created a great deal of wealth for these European countries. They were able to have access to diamonds, gold, silver, natural resources like rubber. And here's an example. They would enslave these people in parts of Africa, especially, and force them to work in mines or in fields, harvesting these crops or mining these natural resources to send back to Europe. So it's pretty unfair to those people in Africa that were already living there. This leads us into talking about the scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa is all the European countries kind of competing with one another to claim what they said was unclaimed land. Now, we know that it wasn't actually unclaimed. There were tribes and there were different groups of people already living all throughout Africa. And this competition between these countries to colonize Africa and other parts of the world is going to lead to conflict between those countries. Here are two different maps, and one is a map from 1880. If you look at the map of Africa from 1880, you see that different parts of Africa are controlled by different ethnic groups or different tribes. So you have kind of little pieces already carved out. And then you have in this gray piece right here, okay, there are groups of people living here, but not one group controlling it. Okay, so you can see what that looked like in 1880. Now, if we look at the map of Africa in 1930, it looks vastly different. Over here on the side, you can see which countries are controlling according to color. So everything in blue was now controlled by France. Everything in pink, this is now controlled by the United Kingdom. So you can see how much of Africa they were able to carve out, and you can just assume how much wealth that was going to bring Great Britain. Okay, it was going to kind of strip the wealth from the native people here in Africa. One popular saying at this time was that the sun never sets on the British Empire because somewhere in the world, the sun was shining on a colony of Great Britain. So everything you see in pink is a colony of Great Britain from this time period. All of Canada, these parts of Africa, India, Australia, these islands, parts of South America. So you can see how vast that worldwide empire was at that time. So again, causing conflict because other countries are going to want to compete with Great Britain for that wealth. Our last cause is nationalism, and nationalism is having a strong sense of pride for one's nation or ethnic group. And an ethnic group is people who share a common cultural background. This picture here is a group that we'll be talking about, and these are called the Slavs. The Slavs are an ethnic group in Eastern Europe. And a lot of Europeans at this time started to feel like their nations or their ethnic groups were superior, and they deserved rights to their own countries, for example. And nationalism was especially high in Serbia, that country just south of Austria-Hungary. Okay, it's highlighted right here. So Bosnia is this blue region here that is in the southern part of Austria-Hungary. And many Slavs, that group that we were talking about in the last slide, lived here in Bosnia, and they lived in Serbia. The Slavs wanted to have their own country free from both Austria-Hungary and free from Bosnia. So these nationalistic feelings are going to lead to an event that's going to spark the outbreak of World War I. So what happened is you had this guy, and his name is Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He's heir to the Austria-Hungary throne, and he's visiting Sarajevo. Sarajevo is a city that's located in Bosnia. Let me go back one slide. So Sarajevo is right here. And we know that the Bosnians wanted to be independent from Austria-Hungary and that the Slavs wanted to be independent from Bosnia. So there was a guy by the name of Gavrilo Princip, and he was part of a nationalist, extremist group called the Black Hand. And he fired a shot into the Archduke's car when the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, okay, and an Archduke, that he's a Archduke means that's his royalty. Being the heir to the Austria-Hungary throne, that means he was next to become king in Austria-Hungary. And so he was a really important figure. It's like basically he was a prince. And he fires a shot into the Archduke's car, and he fatally wounds the Archduke and his wife. So essentially, he kills them during this parade route that he is on. So Austria-Hungary believes that the assassination is organized by the Serbian government. The Serbian government didn't actually organize this, but this is what Austria-Hungary thought. This was actually orchestrated by an extremist group. Now, did the Serbian government know that maybe they were planning something? Possibly. So, 1 month after the assassination, because Austria Hungary thinks that this is Serbia's fault, they declare war on Serbia. So, this is going to spark that alliance system that we talked about earlier. It sets off a chain reaction of European countries joining the war. So, because Austria Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia gets all of their troops ready and they start moving to the border of Russia that borders Austria Hungary. They mobilize very quickly in order to help defend Serbia because Russia and Serbia are in an alliance. Because Russia mobilizes, Germany invades France because France is in an alliance with Russia. So Germany goes in and invades France. And then when Germany invades France and Belgium, Great Britain joins because they are in an alliance with France. So you can see how a conflict between two countries, Austria, Hungary, and Serbia, ends up being a conflict between all of those European countries because of that previous alliance system. So, what I would like for you to do next is watch the two videos, the two short cartoon videos that are under this that will help you explain this just a little bit further.